In the summer of 1977, America was busy doing the hustle, trying to dance off gas shortages and hard times. But in rural Alabama, folks were facing a different kind of struggle, one that left 5 bodies, 8 years of whispers, and justice served by an unlikely hand. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain to see what's hidden behind that Southern hospitality. Because around here, nothing stays buried for long. It was 1977, and America was living between 2 very different worlds. One foot dancing under bright disco lights fueled by cocaine and Sister Sledge. The other foot stuck in muddy economic struggles, recession fears, and nationwide gas shortages. And down in rural central Alabama, 2 different kinds of worlds were getting ready to collide. On the afternoon of June 18th, 400 mourners were gathered at the house of Hutchinson Funeral Home. Reverend Willie Maxwell had just finished giving the eulogy of his 16-year-old stepdaughter when out of nowhere, a man in a green suit stood up, walked over to the casket, and shot the Reverend 3 times in the face. Willie Jr. Maxwell was born May 31, 1925 in Kellyton, a very small town in Alabama. The population was approximately 241 in 1925 and has gotten even more rural over time. In 2023, the census recorded only 168 residents. Willie was one of 9 kids born to Ada and Will Maxwell. Ada was a housekeeper and Will was a sharecropper. And as many did back then, Willie quit school at the age of 12 to help work on the farm. In 1943, Willie turned 18 and registered for the draft. He was processed and sent to Fort Benning, Georgia for basic training. Afterwards, he would be stationed at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, where he then became sergeant in the World War II. After being discharged, he re-enlisted and spent the next 2 years in the Engineer and Aviation Battalion in California. When discharged again in 1947, Willie moved back home to the state of Alabama and got a job at Roszelle Manufacturing in Alexander City. People who knew Willie said he was handsome, elegant, and charming. He could always hold a room with his eloquent and formal speaking style. After settling down, Willie met his first wife, Mary Lou Edwards, who at the time lived with her parents working as a seamstress. In 1949, the couple got married and settled down in a nearby town called Nicksburg, Alabama. In 1962, Willie was ordained at the Philippi Baptist Church located in Keno. Because Willie had such a vast knowledge and understanding of Scripture, this mixed well with his charming personality, and he became a well-respected reverend all across the state. His parishioners admired him and praised his sermons. One member saying, "His prayer could make the house move." Diligent in taking seminary classes, he was awarded a certificate of theological studies in 1970. But later that same year, tragedy would befall the Maxwell family. And over the next 8 years, tragedy would strike a total of 5 times. August 3, 1970, Reverend Maxwell went to preach at a revival near Auburn. While Willie was off getting worshipers high on the Holy Spirit, his 43-year-old wife, Mary Lou, went to go visit her sister. When she got back home, she stopped to chat with her next-door neighbor, Dorcas Anderson. She mentioned to Dorcas that Willie had asked her to wait by the phone so he could call when he was on his way. She thought it was an odd request, but didn't think too much of it. Revivals were an all-day event, and not knowing exactly when he would be heading back home, she went back inside to wait for his call. Around 10 o'clock p.m., Mary Lou went back over to Dorcas' house. Dorcas said she was nervous and anxious. Willie had called and said he had been in a bad car accident, and she was going to go help him. Mary Lou got into her car, headed out toward Willie, but she never came back. At 2 a.m., the police department got a call from Willie Maxwell. He said his wife was missing. He had been away all day at a revival, but on his way back stopped at a service station around 10 to get a Coke and called home, but Mary Lou didn't answer. He then got home around 11 p.m., and she still wasn't there. But because he was exhausted from his day, he laid down and fell asleep. Because that is what you do when your wife is missing. Police arrived at the Maxwell residence shortly after Willie's call. He said when he woke up at 2 a.m., Mary Lou still wasn't home, so he called her mother and sister and even talked with Dorcas next door. But none of them had seen or heard from Mary Lou all night. Investigators then spoke with Dorcas themselves, and she told them about the conversation she had with Mary Lou earlier that night. She told them how Mary Lou thought it was odd Willie wanted her to wait by the phone, and she then told them about Mary Lou coming over in a panic, saying he had been in a bad car accident, and then she left. Dorcas noticed when Willie came home, his car didn't have any damage to it. She even told her husband Abram something was very wrong. Investigators talked with Willie and asked him about what Dorcas had said. Willie said she was wrong, and he never said he was in a bad accident. And the more he thought about it, Willie said, it was probably Mary Lou that had gotten into an accident, and they should go look for her. Willie advised police to go look on Highway 22, a remote country road that she would have taken to get to and from her sister's house. It seems the Lord had also given Willie the sight. Police went to investigate, and sure enough, they found Mary Lou's car on Highway 22 located in a ditch next to some trees. The car looked like it was parked, the engine was running, and the headlights were still on. There was very little damage to the car. The officers found Mary Lou dead, laying in the passenger side. There was blood on the outside of the passenger door window, the rear window, and all inside the car. Mary Lou's face and head was covered in lacerations. Her jawbone was chipped, her nose dislocated. She was missing part of her left ear, which was found in the floor of the back seat. As the officers investigated the area, they found drops of Mary Lou's blood in the driveway and in the sand of a nearby church. The autopsy later determined she had defensive wounds on her body and ligature marks around her neck. There was sand and leaves inside her mouth and on her dress. Because of the marks on her neck, the coroner suggested it was from someone tying a rope around her neck to strangle her. But Mary Lou had fought back, and when the strangling didn't work, she was beaten to death. This was no car accident. This was murder. Willie Maxwell was arrested on August 10th, but he wasn't the only one. It seemed Willie had a side piece, and her name was Ophelia Burns. Officers alleged that Ophelia helped Willie ambush Mary Lou when she went to meet him at the church, and at the very least, Ophelia had helped move the car. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough evidence to make the charges stick. Willie and Ophelia were both released, and the charges dropped shortly after. This was 1977 Alabama, and at a time when domestic violence wasn't a thing yet, and certainly not when it involved a black couple. However, the police were not ready to throw in the towel. They continued to collect evidence and build their case. Meanwhile, Willie didn't slow down a bit after his wife's death. He hired attorney Tom Radley to file a complaint with 3 different life insurance companies. It seems Willie had conveniently taken out not 1, but 3 life insurance policies on Mary Lou just a few days before her death. Because insurance companies aren't always the devil incarnate, they declined Willie's claim, stating Mary Lou's death had clearly not been an accident. But Willie was the devil incarnate. He and his attorney took the insurance company to trial in 1971. The jury awarded Maxwell the $15,000. 3 weeks later, Willie was indicted on first-degree murder for killing his wife, Mary Lou Maxwell. The trial didn't last even 1 day. The prosecution's star witness was Dorcas Anderson. She was to testify about Mary Lou stating Willie had been in an accident and she had saw no damage to Willie's car. But that testimony never happened. Between the original hearing and the trial, Dorcas's husband, Abram, had passed away suddenly. Abram had ALS, and although no autopsy was done, his cause of death was listed as pneumonia. But wait. Just like any good Southern religious scandal, there's more. It seemed Dorcas was now in a relationship with Willie. Her statement changed. She said she could no longer remember what she had told police just a year before. She then said the Reverend couldn't have done the murder because he wasn't anywhere near his wife at the time of the accident. Reverend Willie Maxwell was acquitted of all charges due to lack of evidence. And Ophelia, she got off too. Following the trial, Willie and his attorney continued going after the other two insurance companies. When they took them to court, the jury always sided with Maxwell. Later that year, they had collected on all three policies, and he was paid a total of $100,000, which is equivalent to about $550,000 today. In November of 1971, 46-year-old Willie married his 27-year-old neighbor, Dorcas. A few years later, they had a son, and rumors were flying that Willie had not only killed his wife, Mary Lou, but also Dorcas' husband, Abram. To make things more interesting, rumors started coming out about Willie's connections to practicing voodoo in his private life. In addition, Willie had recently taken a trip to meet with the Seven Sisters, a powerful hoodoo group of women who operated in New Orleans. According to an article in the Atlanta Journal and Constitution, Maxwell had flaunted a human earlobe and a wooden clothespin as a token of his powers. He practiced black magic in one room of his home, putting curses on his enemies, and always wore a bulletproof vest. Between the deaths and Willie's voodoo connections, the entire black community was in constant fear of the Reverend Willie Maxwell. February 6, 1972, tragedy struck again. Willie's older brother, John Columbus, was found dead in the street of an intersection just a few miles from Nicksburg. Police couldn't figure out how John had gotten there. It was just him, there was no car, and he didn't have any injuries on the outside of his body. Toxicology reports were conducted, and the results showed a blood alcohol level of 4.1, a potentially fatal amount. They wondered how he could have even gotten to such a level without passing out first. It seemed likely that he had been forced to consume the alcohol. Police didn't have much else to go on, and his death was ruled death by intoxication and exposure to the cold. Coincidentally, again, Willie had just taken out a life insurance policy on John before he was found dead. It seems the great Reverend had been blessed with good forethought. 7 months later of the same year, a motorist was driving down a rural county road near Nicksburg and came upon a car on the side of the road. They saw a familiar scene. The engine was still running and the headlights were on. As they approached, they saw the lower part of the windshield was cracked, but there wasn't any other damage. They then saw a woman lying face down across the front seat. Her head was toward the passenger side and her feet on the driver's side. The woman was identified as Dorcas Anderson Maxwell. Investigators were determined to get him this time. They went over the crime scene with a fine-tooth comb, collecting every bit of evidence they could. When they interviewed Willie, he said Dorcas had made dinner that night, then put the kids to bed. Her mother had gone fishing earlier that day and offered them some of the fresh fish. So around 9 p.m., she drove over to Alexander City to her mother's house and said she wouldn't be gone long. He stayed home with the kids. Interestingly, the car was found only about 250 yards from their home. Once again, investigators had a hard time determining the cause of death. The autopsy didn't help matters. They found leaves in her sandals, a few small cuts on her elbow, shoulder, and above her eye. Toxicology showed nothing in Dorcas' system. The only suspicious thing was a fractured hyoid bone. With the advancement of medicine, today it is well known that a fractured hyoid bone is the sign of strangulation. But back then, it could be damaged during the autopsy. The coroner did not feel comfortable ruling this as strangulation. Their official cause of death was ruled acute asthmatic bronchitis, even though Dorcas did not suffer from asthma. This time, Willie's side hustle had grown. He filed claims against 4 insurance policies for Dorcas. Once again, the companies refused to pay, so once again, he and his lawyer filed suit. The companies argued this was outright insurance fraud and refused to pay a dime. They even stated Dorcas' signature was forged, or at least signed under duress, as it did not match her standard signature. The companies also dropped a bomb. Willie had taken out policies on numerous other family members. And yet somehow, like Charlie Sheen, Willie kept winning. In September 1973, Willie was awarded a 40% payout, which totaled $32,800. The equivalent is about $140,000 today. You would think after all this, Willie would just chill or at least take some time off to let the heat die down. But it appeared that Willie enjoyed the heat, as most demons do, and could only contain himself for about 2.5 years. In February 1976, a fourth family member was found dead. Willie's nephew, James Hicks, was reported missing by his family. He was the son of Willie's older sister, May. On February 16th, James's 1968 Pontiac Firebird was found in a ravine on Highway 9 near Nicksburg. The car had been concealed by some bushes and small trees. When police arrived, they found James's body inside the car. He was sitting upright in the driver's seat. It does seem Willie was getting a little more creative. In the back seat, the police found paperwork for a life insurance policy, clearly placed there to be found on purpose. But this time it was purchased by James himself, and James's mother May was listed as the beneficiary. But the handwriting did not belong to James. It was found later to be Willie's. Shocking. It appeared James was not drunk, on drugs, or speeding at the time of the accident. Once again, the car looked like it had been parked there, not crashed, as there was no damage to the car. His body showed no visible signs of injuries either. He had a few small cuts on his legs and chest. Only caffeine and a very small amount of alcohol was found in his system. The autopsy concluded nothing that would account for the death, so it was ruled natural causes. Willie tried to gain control by asking his sister May to give him power of attorney, but she refused. This is one time Willie's plan backfired. Then 4 short months later, a 5th member of Willie Maxwell's family was found dead. Shirley Ann Ellington, Cheryl to her friends, was born on November 28, 1960. As a young girl, she went to live and was then adopted by her aunt, Ophelia Burns. She had been living with Willie and Ophelia since they had gotten married, and was now Willie's stepdaughter. In June 1977, Shirley started working at a fast food place, and because it was located near her sister Levine's house, she had spent her first week of her new job at her sister's. On June 9th, Shirley left her sister's house and headed back to Nicksburg to be with Ophelia and Willie. On the 11th, Willie stated he arrived home and found that Shirley had taken Ophelia's car and left. He said she was always leaving and doing whatever she wanted. Willie later said he thought she made plans with some friends. When she didn't come home, he and Ophelia went to see Levine, but she hadn't seen her either. So around midnight, they drove over to the Alexander City Police Department to check if anyone had reported an accident or found the car. While they were there, an officer told them someone had found a car at 11:45 that night, about 7 miles away. The officer told them to drive out there and see if they could identify the car. Maxwell said when they arrived on the scene, state troopers wouldn't let him get out of the car and told him it didn't concern him. But they did let Ophelia and Levine go look, as there was also a body that had been found with the car. Shirley was found face up underneath the left front wheel of Ophelia's Gran Torino. There was a flat tire on its side that had been removed from the rim. There was a new tire right next to it. The jack that had been used to jack up the car had not been used with the base. The scene looked as if Shirley stopped to change a flat tire, didn't jack the car up properly, and it fell, crushing her to death underneath the wheel. On the surface, it was a tragic accident, but police were not convinced. With Maxwell's history, more than likely the 16-year-old girl had been murdered. A few days later, news had gotten out and reporters were calling. One very bold newspaper outright asked Maxwell about all 5 suspicious deaths. Maxwell was quoted saying, "I have prayed and thought about it a lot. One thought was that not all were accidental. It looks like there is some enemy sticking around to hinder me. I haven't seen him, but I am asking the Lord and he will see. And if I stay close to the Lord, I too will see. When Willie was asked about the voodoo, he replied, I have heard that, but it's not anything true. They said the same things about Jesus Christ, but I'm not as good as he is. On June 18th, mourners gathered at the house of Hutchison Funeral Home for Shirley. There were 600 in attendance, all watching while Willie himself gave the eulogy. As the service came to an end, Shirley's sister Levine went up to the casket and started crying. She looked over and saw that Willie was not upset, and she lost it. She pointed at him and shouted, You killed my sister, and you're going to pay for it. Seconds later, a man in a green suit jumped up from the pew he was sitting in and shouted to Willie, You gonna die. He then pulled out a pistol and shot the Reverend Willie Maxwell 3 times in the face. The shooter was 36-year-old Robert Louis Burns, Shirley's uncle. Robert was arrested at the chapel and was followed outside by his brother, who happened to also be a police officer. He asked Robert why he shot Maxwell. Robert replied, I had to do it, and if I had to do it over, I'd do it again. Another officer on the scene, Officer John Ware, reported that he overheard this exchange. Robert was taken to Alexander City Police Department and charged with first-degree murder, to which he later pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Robert was defended by none other than the shameless Tom Radley, Willie's longtime attorney who had helped him with the life insurance policies. And it seemed that the prosecutor, Tom Young, was the only one upset by Willie's death. The other community members did not comment and in fact stayed as far away from Willie as they could when he was alive. They were afraid of him and honestly were relieved now that he was dead. Robert Burns was an instant hero. June 5th, authorities confirmed that Shirley was Willie's 5th victim. The autopsy showed she had been dead before the car had fallen on her. She had been strangled and suffocated. Further proof was the lack of fingerprints on the car, tire, or lug wrench. There was no residue on her hands from the tires or tools. Police officers did not name any suspects, but they did say they did not foresee any future arrests being made. A funeral was held for the Reverend Willie Maxwell on June 22nd at Peace and Goodwill Baptist Church, with approximately 400 in attendance. Many were there just to see what would happen. A eulogy was given by Reverend Marist and said, Maxwell had been granted eternal life and would come back to help people. Moses was a murderer, but God used that murderer. He made mistakes just like you, but the devil couldn't take Willie from God. The satanic power covering the earth cannot take away his eternal life. September 1977, the trial began for Robert Burns. A jury of 12 all-white men was selected, and the courtroom was packed. Prosecutors told the jury Robert planned the murder and was a one-man lynch mob. They were fighting an uphill battle, though. Not only was Robert a local hero, the prosecutor couldn't get the judge to admit Officer James Ware's statement about how Robert told his brother he had to shoot him, and he would do it again. The problem was that Robert had not been Mirandized before his brother, who was a police officer, had asked him any questions. Therefore, the evidence would not be admissible since he wasn't read his rights. The defense had 2 goals. One was to make sure the jury knew that Robert was a war veteran, and the other was that the voodoo rumors about Willie had been true. He would ask the witnesses if they knew about the blood smeared all over Willie's front porch or the dead chickens hung from the pecan trees in his yard. He also asked if they knew about the black pepper found on his body after he was killed. They didn't know about any of those things, but the point was to plant ideas in the jury's heads that the voodoo rumors were true. Defense did admit Robert killed Willie, but it wasn't premeditated. He had been insane at the time of the shooting. A psychologist even testified to this. She said Robert suffered from PTSD as he had just gotten back from Vietnam. He was a good man, and the PTSD is why he had shot Willie. One witness, named Patricia, testified she was sitting right next to Robert during the funeral and he cried the whole time. He was so emotional that he couldn't speak. She said after he shot Maxwell, she tried to talk to Robert, but he was in some kind of trance and he wasn't responding. Another witness, named Alfonso Murray, said that Willie had tried on many occasions to hire him to kill Shirley. He said she had tried to poison him, so he had to kill her, but it had to be done before June 16th. Alfonso said no, but Maxwell was persistent. He offered him a car, money, and an acre of land with a small home on it. Alfonso still said no, and he had to report the harassment to his boss after Maxwell had showed up at his job one day. His boss ran him off and reported the encounter to the police. The officer who responded that day corroborated the story. After a day and a half of deliberation, the jury had a question. They wanted to know what would happen to Robert if they found him not guilty by reason of insanity. The judge told them not to worry about that and proceed with deliberation. 5 hours later, the jury did just that. They found Robert Burns not guilty by reason of insanity. Later, the jury foreman was asked about the statement Robert had made to his brother and would it have changed things if it had been admissible. The foreman said it wouldn't have made a difference. After the verdict, the judge wanted to send Robert directly to Bryce Hospital for evaluation. His attorney asked if he could go home and spend the last night with his family. The judge agreed. Following the conviction, the DA, Tom Young, made a statement saying the plea of insanity was never proven. It was actually disproven. He said if Robert was sent to Bryce, it would be a fraud and a waste of taxpayer money. The judge ordered Robert to be committed to Bryce Hospital for evaluation, and it was determined he was not insane at the time of the shooting. The psychologist who testified at trial later said she knew Robert wasn't insane at the time of the murder, and that it was actually the most sane thing anyone had done at all. He was just doing what the law should have done a lot sooner. After spending 2 weeks at the Bryce Hospital, Robert Burns was released. He was a free man. Finally, justice had been served. It took 8 years, 5 lives, and 1 man bold enough to walk into a funeral with a gun to finally bring justice to Coosa County. And in a place where whispers carried further than the law ever did, folks might say it was long overdue. Even in 1977, when the South was still tangled up in old wounds, division, and heavy history, a jury of 12 white men sat in that courtroom and for once saw past the lines drawn by race, power, and fear. Robert Burns wasn't just cleared, he was understood. Thanks for listening to Moss and Murder. If this episode unsettled you, good. That's history doing its job. If you like the story, leave a review. Share it with someone who loves the dark side of the pulpit, and follow us for more secrets from the Deep South. And if you ever find yourself at a small town funeral, keep one eye on the casket and the other on the door. You never know who's walking in with unfinished business.